I'm Ron Puldayan. I'm the executive director of Men Having Babies. And when my husband and I started our journey, oh, you know what? Actually, I'll do something else first. I'm going to have everybody else on the panel introduce themselves, and then we're going to jump right in. So go ahead, Lise.
My name is Dr. Lise Regula. I serve as Advocacy Associate for Men Having Babies, as well as a biologist at University of Dayton.
I'm John Julick, and I'm a new dad.
My name is Megan Hall Greenberg, and I own Surrogacy Connections as well as a 4-time surrogate.
So when my husband and I, do I just use this? Who's there? Okay, I don't need this then. So when my husband and I started our journey some 24 plus years ago, we just assumed that if you wanted to become parents biologically, we'll be able to find a solution. But of course, the moment we thought about surrogacy, and adoption was not even an option for us, but of course we considered that to some extent as well. We were trying to think about how we feel about it. And at the time, the first thing we thought about, which was just our concern, is how would the woman who cares for us going to feel after she, gives us the child she carried? And that really worried us, especially at the time there was no gestational surrogacy, so she would have had to be the biological parent of the child. And then we thought about maybe we have somebody else who can donate eggs. There were no egg donations at the time, and in our case, that was the solution. My husband's sister donated the eggs, and the kids were born with genetic material from both sides. But that was the thing that gave us pause. Other things give them pause. Some people think about how the kid's going to be without a mother. Other people think about how's the surrogate going to feel about it? How her kids are going to feel about it? What about the medical risks? People might have different concerns. And when we created Men Having Babies, we went through the process of trying to figure out how we feel about all these things in a little more systematic way. We invited some surrogates to join us in a committee, and we created an ethical framework. So we'll talk about some of those things today. But the context is, before we move forward in a journey, we want to see how we're going to feel about it, because when the kids come, they're going to know how you feel about it. If you're going to have any reservations about how they came to the world, or if you encounter criticism from somebody about how they think, because a lot of people have misconceptions about it, people came to the world, your children came to the world, you should be fully on board and understanding and in the position to not just talk to people who feel that two men should not be parents or a single man should not be a parent, but also people who might feel that there's something unacceptable or at least strange about the way we became parents. So that's what we were trying to figure out, and that's part of our advocacy today. And the first thing we're going to do is talk about how, when we're thinking about surrogacy, we want to understand first what people might think about surrogacy, what the stigma or the misconceptions, or what we feel our misconceptions are. But also, we very quickly decided that we wanted to look at research. Some of it didn't exist as much back then. There's a lot of research coming in more and more over time. Can I switch to my slides? Oh, there we go. So we felt that we needed to go to research, and what I want to do is invite my colleague Lise Regula to go through a few of the topics that are related to that, and then we'll take it from there.
All right. Thanks, Ron. So this is Men Having Babies, a conference about how to become parents. Why are we concerned about research? Well, the reason we're concerned about research is because we want to do this in a way that respects people, not just us men having babies, but all of the providers who are here, evidence, science, that helps improve our lives in a lot of ways. And it can help answer some of these questions that can be really hard. Well, how is the person going to think? How are they going to feel? How are people going to view my child? And the really cool thing, in my opinion, is that what we have in the way of research around surrogacy is that the misconceptions are misconceptions. The data, when we're looking at people's lived experience with surrogacy, the surrogates as well as the intended parents, is usually far more positive than the cultural view or social view makes it out to be. Things like the movie Baby Mama and the sensational news clips are not reality. Which, it's easy to say that because in the case of Baby Mama, it's a movie. But that's not what actually people experience when they're going through this journey. And in part, that's because over the years, Ron mentioned 24 years since his kids were brought about through this process. In that time, we have brought evidence, we've brought science to make sure that this is a good process, as well as compassion and ethics. And that's one of the things that Men Having Babies has helped to contribute, is looking at the ethics within surrogacy and how do we do this well. Just to kind of give you a heads up, some of the things that you might hear if you do decide to pursue surrogacy are some of the stigmas that are listed up here. You might hear folks express concern that, oh, well, you're hurting someone because you're taking away this child that they gave birth to. Or you might hear that surrogates are just in it for the money. Or you might hear that surrogates are uneducated and don't know what they're getting into. Reality is, and we have data to show this, not just us men having babies, but research from I'll show some of our research library in a little bit. But the data shows that instead, part of why surrogacy, at least when we're talking about Canada and the United States, which is where we're primarily concerned with surrogacy here and men having babies, surrogates here tend to do this because they have had a positive experience with pregnancy before. They're a self-selecting group. They are also people who have a desire to help contribute to the world in a way that they see as meaningful. They have some connection with the process of parenthood and the struggles of some folks' inability to conceive. They want to be a part of helping that solution or pushing forward a solution in a very personal way. They find it rewarding. And some of the research that we do have up on our website and the research papers that we have up there talk about in detail the psychological experiences, psychological outcomes, and it's not a traumatic event. For most surrogates, the act of handing over newborn that they've just given birth to their parents and seeing that family be formed is an incredibly powerful and positive event. I say this both because we have data that shows it was also my experience. I have been a surrogate twice, once gestational and once traditional. There is something hugely life-changing about being able to say, I made that family. That's That's a superpower that not everybody has. And it's kind of cool. Who doesn't want superpowers, right? We also have up on the website with our research library data about the well-being of children born through surrogacy. Because this is another area where people may express concerns. You know, oh, well, your kid's not going to have a mom, you're not going to have that connection, you're not going to have this understanding. The reality of the situation, the child is going to have two parents, or one in the case of single dads, who are deeply invested in this child's creation. That is the important thing. We know in the United States, 50%, roughly speaking, of pregnancies are unplanned. Here, 100 of the pregnancies are planned. And if you can go into a process and actually have that planning and forethought and intentionality, you tend to have better outcomes. And the cool thing is we're building more research on LGBTQ families in general that show that not just kids born through surrogacy, but kids in the LGBTQ community have as good, if not better, psychological outcomes than kids coming from straight homes, which is kind of cool because that is a stigma our community often faces. You know, not knowing mom or not knowing dad is going to have a negative impact. That's not the case. Having loving parents is having loving parents, and that helps kids in a lot of different ways. The typical surrogate, in which this is kind of touching on that stigma or misconception of who becomes surrogates. Generally speaking, all of the ideas are wrong. People are not typically going into this because they are looking for the money. Generally speaking, people who are becoming surrogates, at the very least, have a high school diploma, often have higher degrees, including PhDs. They are often not coming from high poverty in households. They often have some income and moderate or higher incomes, depending on the individual. They're often employed doing something other than surrogacy. So they're not doing this as a job, it's an add-on. It's something that they enjoy, you know? And they're not on public assistance. So it's generally not the rule, and according to ethical standards, should not be an acceptable thing, that people are benefiting from public assistance in some way while doing this. If you had any misconceptions, if you came in here thinking about baby mama and all of the fun cultural references, that's not what surrogates look like in the US and Canada today. These statistics and this screening, the self-screening, self-selection that goes into a lot of this, help to make sure that surrogates and intended parents are on more equal footing, which helps to avoid that potential for exploitation that can happen in relationships where there is a distinct power imbalance. A little bit more detail, less statistics and more verbiage. Surrogates are screened for not having psychopathologies, not having mental illnesses. They're also screened looking at personality tests. All of these important aspects to make sure that it is a healthy, well-supported individual who is going through this process with a support system in place that helps them to be healthy throughout the pregnancy, because we know that is going to lead to a better outcome for the kid and a better outcome for the relationship in general. Screening processes for surrogacies are pretty darn extensive. including psychological, medical, and there's generally legal counsel represented on both sides as well. Some of those references that I was talking about, some of that research, this, and this, and this, and this are just a few of the studies that have been done looking at surrogacy so that we can make sure that surrogacy is being done to the best of our ability. You can find these articles and more if you're interested, if you like data, if you need something to help you sleep at night, whatever, up on our data or on our research library at menhavingbabies.org/research. And I really encourage folks, browse some of this stuff. Knowledge is power. The more educated you are in this journey, both about yourself, your own intentions, what you want for your family, for your kid, and about this process, the more easy it is for you to address misconceptions as they come up and have those difficult conversations that might happen during the course of your journey.
Thank you, Liz. So we're also going to have a personal stories panel, the perspectives panel tomorrow, and you'll hear some more from surrogates, dads, also children who were born through surrogacy. These are anecdotal stories. This is why it's important for us to also show research. But yes, a lot of the people who are carry baby for other people are being asked, how much are you making? People are very curious about it. People might make assumptions about the social demographic, background, etc. So all this information is very relevant to understand that the reality is different than what people might be concerned about. And many of you might not have had a single concern. We don't want to, persuade you that there should be concerns, but these are things that you might as well hear about in advance rather than, being unprepared. And the important thing is that we want to explain what Lee started implying, that we're studying something here, but in a way we're cheating a bit, because there are a lot of things in place to make sure that these outcomes are the way we are. So it's a little bit of the chicken and the egg. We're saying surrogacy could be done ethically because, look, the surrogates are not poor, they're being represented, they're being supported psychologically, etc. But it's not happening on its own. We're not advocating that surrogacy spontaneously is ethical. We're saying that surrogacy could be done ethically, and in the United States it is. And to help us understand a little bit about what the protocols and the process that allows all this, and this is, by the way, a quote here from one of several international associations we've been collaborating with, because there was a time when, and it's still unfortunately relevant, the UN Commission rapporteur, a person that was supposed to write and did write in a report to the United Nations, because there is widespread attempt to define surrogacy as child trafficking. And most countries in Europe prohibit surrogacy, or at least not allow surrogacy to be done in a practical way. And that report was not as bad as it could have been after people, including us, met with that rapporteur and showed some evidence and other made our logical arguments. But the reality is that there is still a lot of such language out there. A lot of it is because surrogacy is such a niche issue that most people know extremely little, if anything, about it. So as I just mentioned, the Center for Reproductive Rights, including some other organizations which are all on our website, have weighed in at the time when they submitted their positions to the UN rapporteur, and indeed support a lot of what we're saying. So I'm going to have Megan come here now and talk about how are these outcomes possible, because as I said, we don't make it, it's not spontaneous.
Hi, everyone hear me okay? Perfect. So I'm going to talk a little bit from an agency perspective as well as being a surrogate, and talk about kind of the ethical things that we do as our framework, as well as you should be looking for kind of as a holistic view on your relationship with your surrogate, as well as kind of the process that we as an agency go through. And then surrogates are kind of on point for at least 12 months, 12 to 24 months on this journey to make you dads. So we'll talk a little bit about that. As an agency, when we're either recruiting or talking to surrogates, a lot of it's based on education. So as surrogates ourselves, we talk to them about what the process looks like. Who are you helping? What does it look like at that end, right? What is your why behind why you're doing it? And I have to say, I always am very transparent. I was just in the board meeting as well. I'm very transparent. My first journey was 15 years ago, and I delivered 15 years ago for another agency. And I was a single mom of 2, and I wanted a down payment on a house. So at that time, I'm just very honest, I did it for $17,000, very different from what today looks like. But that was my first why, I was like, I saw a billboard on the side of the road, and I was like, how cool would that be? I had easy pregnancies, it's fine. I ended up in a C-section, but which was not normal for me. But when I saw the parents hold their baby for the first time, it was life-changing. I saw how that impacted my kids. My son was 5 at the time. He's now 20. And he was going to his kindergartner class and saying, my mom is having a baby for someone else. And the teacher was like, what the heck is going on? And so long ago, it wasn't even same-sex couples. You know, I only carried for traditional couples. And it was just, it's still kind of new in our industry. And now being an agency owner for almost 14 years, it was just very impactful of, you know, my last baby was 9 years ago, and that's my own child. It was donor baby, but having the impact, the small impact in 3 other families' lives, it was, I don't know, almost addictive. After that first one, it was that, oh my gosh, look what I helped with. And, you know, my journeys weren't like a lot of journeys nowadays where you have these lifelong relationships. I have lifelong relationships with my couples through my agency, but I don't have relationships with the babies that I carried. And I'm okay with that. I've always been okay with that. A lot of surrogates go in thinking, well, I'm just doing this to help someone. I'm not in it for me. I mean, I did it for a down payment on a house, let's be real here. But the other ones, my subsequent journeys, it was very much like, I want to be able to do this again. And it was almost that joy you see on someone's face when you, and I don't ever say like, I'm giving away a child. I'm just giving it back to their parents, right? I just was the helper for 9 months. And really when we're recruiting now and this day and age, of course there's a money aspect to it. We know this, but it's a lot about education and what that end journey looks like and what you get emotionally, mentally, physically, what your family gets out of it. So talking to surrogates on their why is a lot of it. And a lot of people won't say it's for the money. So let's be real here. It is. I mean, part of it. It's part of it, right? And there's that balance. As a surrogate, you really have to kind of not put your life on hold, but it's really a lot of work, so to speak, especially for the first 3 to 6 months. Your life is under a microscope. So when you apply to an agency, we're doing a lot of social backgrounds, your actual criminal backgrounds for anyone in the household over the age of 18, as well as then her, right? So if you live with your parents or kids over 18, a lot of that background information. Medical screening, a lot of invasive procedures that you thought giving birth was bad. But there's a lot of, you know, being very open with your medical history. And, you know, that's something I'm being vulnerable with. And a lot of people aren't okay with that. It's the psychological part, really diving into, you know, how was your teenage years with your parents? And, you know, what's your support system look like? It's talking through all of those aspects. Things that you don't even think about. When I first did my journey, I had my psych eval and I failed it. And I said, what? I was like, we need a retest. So they actually did an additional one, but it was more like, well, you're a single mom and you're here and you work and you have 2 kids. And I'm like, but I manage all of that. Like I'm juggling all these balls, and as a single mom, you don't allow those to drop. I ended up passing, but it was more like they thought, well, your plate's too full. So we really have to suss out and kind of evaluate what that looks like, right? And we talk through the surrogates on that process. Do you have the support system? If you're a single mom, what does your support system look like? Family, friends, who do you surround yourself with? Your agency is a big support as well, and then other peers and surrogates as well. Okay. The social support. So a lot of questions we get is, what are people going to think of me? The first question I always get asked is, how much money did you make? Okay, that's just an awkward question, and usually I said that's not any of your business. But it's a question, and when we talk through surrogates, like if you are asked that question, how are you going to answer it? It's talking through these very real items, right? And being vulnerable. Economically, like Liz said, it's a lot of, it's a lot of, we need to make sure you're not on government assistance, right? Can you do without money? Can you pay for a doctor visit and wait to be reimbursed? We don't want the stigmatism of they need the money, right? Most surrogates don't need it. We're in middle income to higher income brackets usually, or in a situation, we have a lot of stay-at-home moms too that are financially stable through their husbands. Their health insurance, everything's done, right? So it's really kind of getting past that stigmatism. We obviously follow all of our surrogates from the beginning when they apply to us and through the education process, all the way through birth, delivery, and afterwards. So a lot of our surrogates will come, again, we're talking about the high of seeing, being able to help people become families. With the process, we make sure everyone is legally supported. So not only do we educate them, but we also make sure they have independent counsel. Of course, we suggest people, but there are both intended parents as well as surrogates are always opt to use their own research and then find their own legal counsel as well. We just support them in whatever is best for them and their family. We also refer to surrogacy forums. I know social media tends to get kind of spun up, and there's lots of good and bad. We tell people to kind of filter out what's best for them, but a lot of the social media influences happen as well. So we just ask everyone to be very cognizant and only take what's good for them out of those conversations. Legal clarity. So when we're talking about that, I know in our matching phases, in our match meetings, we talk about not only will the surrogate be great for candidates through their medical clinic and be able to screen through and be qualified, but we also talk about the state in which the baby will be born. So for surrogacy, it's important to make sure you have the legal counsel that will be able to get your parentage orders and make sure that is secure for you from the beginning. Okay. And then we talk about compensation, life insurance, health insurance. Any good agency or anyone in the industry will direct you to the professionals. We are really great at what we do in our wheelhouse, and that's matching and managing the process for you. But we also refer out a lot to, our risk for insurance, whether it's life insurance or health insurance, as well as independent legal counsels, and all the other little bits that go into it. Is that it? I think I'm good. Okay.
So there is a lot of discussion in this area about surrogate compensation, as you mentioned. And we always like to talk about, the fact that you're not just talking about motivations, you're talking about something that's a lot more dynamic. You're talking about initial motivations, you're talking about the dynamics which you are a lot of time, you're part of. And you're talking about also memories. I like to use the, A's, so these are the M's. It's what people take from the experience afterwards. And people can have more than one motivation at a time. You're a stay-home mom, that's very typical. You could go out of the house, you have small children, and find a job somewhere, or you can stay home for a little while longer with your children, but then compensate for that lack of income by maybe, becoming a surrogate. That's not a simplistic motivation, that's a complex motivation, but you're doing it also because, or maybe even more so because you are enamored, you are, that's something that looks to you like a really terrific thing to do. So we're not looking at a single motivation, but the measures that Megan and Lisa were talking about were put in place to make sure that it's not the predominant or overwhelming reason people are doing it, and that they could, of course, also be financially stable during the process. So it is what we can do to make sure that this is not such a life-altering financial impact on your life that you would be doing it at any cost, that you'd be doing even if you didn't have good enough or your pregnancies were too medically problematic, et cetera, et cetera. So our position about surrogate compensation is that all surrogates are altruistic, but they're doing a good deed for you that cannot just be rewarded with a hearty thank you. It's not, I always give the example of, it's not like helping with a bag of groceries to an older person. This is something that requires a lot of disruption in your life, that creates a lot of disruption in your life. It creates physical discomfort, and it puts your life at risk even. Definitely elements of your health at risk. So these are the considerations for which some remuneration, something is needed to make you whole. When people go through surrogacy with somebody who says, I don't want any money from you, we have seen from experience that there are a lot of tensions from both sides that are created because the compensation wasn't there to balance the enormity of the act. And the parents don't feel comfortable when they know that the person who's helping them have a child has their life disrupted so much they can't go on a family vacation, they can't lift their young children because at a certain time during the pregnancy you're not allowed to lift heavy weights. That, surrogates are not allowed to have sexual relations for a while when they're going through the process. There are all kinds of sacrifices that are being done that would leave you as a prospective parent feeling horrible knowing that you're not doing something to make her whole. But we don't consider surrogates as working for you. And we'll talk more about it. We've spoken a little bit about it already. And all those things come to play, and come to play also in our ethical framework. So we felt a lot of these things in our bellies, but then we decided to create something more structured about it. So I want to invite Lisa again here to briefly go through some of the more formal ways we're trying to work around ethics.
So we're here in New York. Congratulations, I passed a geography test for the first time ever. Surrogacy within New York is actually kind of interesting because it is it is an interesting space. It has not been, or compensated legal surrogacy has not been the case here for a very long time. Within the U.S., generally speaking, most states, so New York joined the majority in that one, but within most states, compensated surrogacy is legal, and we say compensated instead of altruistic because, again, from our perspective, all surrogacy is altruistic at some level. Part of those ethical standards, part of the thing that helps reassure legislators and other individuals that, hey, this is something that can be done well and not hurt someone, is some of the tools that are in place to help that happen are the SEEDS standards. And SEEDS, this is the surrogacy in egg, I'm not going to get the acronym. Yes, thank you. I always get it backwards. But their ethical standard helps to set out this framework that acts as a baseline. It's a self-regulated system, self-regulated industry. This is not something that is mandated by federal or state governments. This is something that people have put together because we care about how this community presents itself and how this community functions. At the end of the day, I don't think anyone here wants to be a part of hurting another person. So, as part of the surrogacy community, we're trying to address that and say, hey, this is how you do that. This is how we create families without intentionally hurting someone and lessening the chances that you're going to unintentionally hurt someone. Those standards are going to include things like psychological screening, medical screening, making sure that there is proper legal counsel for both the surrogate and intended parents, and those aren't the same individual. Just like you wouldn't have the same lawyer representing a defendant and person who is accused of a crime, we're not going to have, it wouldn't be right to have the same attorney representing both parties in this equation. That's not because there's anyone who's done anything wrong in this case. It's just that their individual needs, their individual circumstances aren't always going to be exactly the same. You have a same end goal of we want to work together to produce a child for this couple. We still have to make sure that everybody is protected adequately. Also within the SEEDS standards is that full understanding. This is informed consent. Consent here is not just a simple, are you okay being a surrogate? Cool, done. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of education that goes into this process talking about, are you okay with assuming these risks that go along with pregnancy? Are you okay with potentially not being able to have children again? Losing one's fertility is not something that is off the table with surrogacy. It happens. People sometimes do have complications that mean they lose a uterus. No one wants to see that happen. It's a fact of life, unfortunately. So making sure that the person who is committing to be a surrogate understands these things is really important. There are also side effects that go along with some of the drugs that are used to help a surrogacy happen. They're fairly minimal, but we want to make sure that people are okay with that. It all comes back to making sure that everyone is coming at this from a place where they know what they're getting into so that they can fully say, yes, this is what I want to do. We're trying to minimize chances of somebody getting excited and being like, yes, I really want to do this, and ignoring those risks. And that's why the medical screenings are also important, because sometimes medical screenings do end up bringing to light some information or some health concern that they didn't know about before. And we don't want to start into a surrogacy journey if it is unlikely to lead to a healthy outcome. That's not going to be good for the person who is pregnant. That's not going to be good for the parents. That's not going to be good for the pregnancy itself. We're trying to make sure that everybody is in a good place when they're coming to this decision and when they're coming to this. Those SEED standards also include minimal eligibility criteria. You can't be 17 and be a surrogate. Duh. Some of these are also things that you might not think of. Most of the time, a surrogate has to have had a child already.
All the time.
Yeah, sorry. I sometimes couch terms too much because I'm used to dealing with undergrads. But part of that is so that we know that the person is capable of carrying a child. Part of it is also so that we have some idea of how they respond to pregnancy, labor, and delivery. Having someone go through pregnancy for a first time in a surrogacy journey and finding out that, oops, you're a person who really bonds to a kid immediately, that's not a situation you want to be in. So those eligibility criteria are there to make sure, again, that we're setting up a surrogacy journey to have the highest likelihood of success for all parties involved. Those SEED standards are also going to include best practices. This is best practices for how we actually practice medicine in these circumstances. We want to make sure that there's not a disease that ends up getting past the surrogate for whatever reason. We want to make sure that we're not using just subpar medical practices that are going to be less likely to lead to a healthy pregnancy. We want to make sure that, again, everything is as optimal as it can be. And especially when we're dealing with ART, this is an area where there is a lot of data, where there is a lot of science. We know what works, we know what doesn't work, we know what has better chances than other things. So an example that might come up is single embryo transfers versus dual embryo transfers. We're looking at how do we get a healthy pregnancy, healthy end issue and outcome. Good.
So it's just for those of you, of course, you don't know what SEEDS is, etc. But just so you understand, we had ethical standards that we developed, and then we were very happy to see over the years that an organization that was pretty voluntary in the beginning, the Society for Ethics in Egg Donation and Surrogacy, ended up becoming the de facto trade association of agencies in the United States. And while there are some states that have regulations that are just like New York, that are pretty elaborate, and include, in fact, in the case of New York, because we were very active in passing the Child Parent Security Act, the reform that allowed compensated surrogacy here, has a lot of our terms in it too, so we were happy with that. But between case law and other regulations and now very, very well ingrained best practices, we know how those outcomes we spoke about before, that well over 90% of the people who are surrogates have legal protection, are not in poverty, and all these other things are achieved. It's not a coincidence. And now for an agency or clinic or any other provider to be part of our conferences or part of GPAP or part of our membership program, they have to commit to these standards. So there are agencies, for instance, that don't accept one of what we think and SEEDS think is an important tenet, which is that surrogacy should only be accessible for people who have a reason that they need a surrogate. So if you're a fertile, fully healthy female who can carry a pregnancy and you don't want to be bothered by it because you might be a ballerina or actress or something like that, then here we don't think that the rule, her body, her choice, namely the surrogate, if the surrogate wants to help a ballerina, who cares? Because there's medical risk. Because the surrogate is putting her life at risk. We feel that what's called social surrogacy, the practice of some people wanting to go through surrogacy just because they don't want to have a pregnancy on their own, unless, of course, they have some sort of a medical or even a psychological, very severe psychological issue. And we know that could be an escape clause to some. But if you just don't want to be bothered by that, we think that's not ethical. That's our position. Luckily, SEEDS feels the same as well. We're going to get to this topic in a minute, if surrogacy is a gay issue or not. But as you understand, we feel strongly about the reason why surrogacy should only be practiced under certain circumstances. But that's not the only issue. The other issue that we feel is part of our advocacy is the issue of, is surrogacy accessible in a time even when it is legal and the technology is there, is the fact that a big majority of people who have a reason to need the help of a surrogate cannot afford it. Is that not an ethical issue we should also address? And you already heard a little bit about the fact that we have certain things we're doing about it, but I want to invite John here to talk for a few minutes about his own experience to illustrate some of the things that drive that part of our advocacy.
Thanks. Hi, I'm John. Thanks for getting me here in the rain. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey. I'm a dad now. I have an 8-month-old. What? I know, he's so cute. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey to get here. My finance was like a problem for me because most of my life I was in the circus. I was a circus acrobat up in Montreal, and I toured around the world climbing ropes and rolling down ropes. And then when I was like turned around 30, I was like, how do I have a baby? Let's see, how much does that cost? This is a lot of money. I can't be a circus acrobat and do this anymore. I tried to marry rich, didn't work out for me. Plan A, everybody, if you can marry rich, recommend that. So that didn't work out. And I was a circus acrobat in Canada, and I'm like, what the hell am I gonna do? So I decided I was gonna change careers and do something else where I could afford surrogacy. So I went back to school up in Canada because it's free. Went back to school, and then I moved to San Francisco to get a job in tech, and I ended up working at Twitter. Which acts, it's a whole thing. But I worked at Twitter, started saving money. My best friend offered to be my surrogate, so I was like, oh, that's awesome. So I was gonna save some money there, and I saved money for 8 years, saved for 5 years first. Saved money, made embryos. In 2019, of course, the pandemic happened, so that pushed everything back a little bit. I made my embryos, and then my friend couldn't be my surrogate because of medical stuff. And then I didn't have enough money, so I ran out of money also. So I'm like, crap, and the surrogacy part kind of is more pricey than the egg donation, the embryo part. So I ran out of money and need to figure out how to pay for this, and I already had embryos ready to go. So I reached out to men having babies with the GPAP program. So I did get some support through GPAP. Thank you. Thanks, Ron. So check out GPAP. It's a great program. Got some finance through GPAP, and I also did a lot of employer advocacy. With our insurance, we had $20,000 fertility insurance through our health program, and none of that was for me. And I'm like, hey, y'all, like that's kind of sucks, right? So none of this was for me, so I thought that wasn't right. So I found some other people internally. I built kind of a coalition. I went out to all the other groups, went to the queer group, and the women's group, and the parent group, and it ends up there were a lot of women, mostly, where our benefits weren't serving them either. Mostly women who had to do multiple rounds of IVF. They needed more money. A lot of people were adopting, and the health insurance didn't support anyone adopting, and our head of benefits was actually adopting, so that looked really good for us too. But there were a lot of people that our benefits didn't cover, and some of the women there were also doing surrogacy. So it wasn't a problem just for me, it was a problem for a bunch of people. So we were able to get together and talk to the benefits team and keep flagging this as an issue to help them. Eventually, they gave us benefits. We really focused on like the value proposition we were giving the company of why they should include our benefits, or include this as a benefit. Part of being non-inclusive. I was the only gay person having babies though, so like I was a little part of it, but the benefits we have weren't serving the entire employee base. And we had, like in our Slack group, we had like 300 people who were interested in having these benefits who weren't getting it. So it was kind of a big group of people. And then we just kind of be really squeaky. And we keep like, every time we had a meeting, we're like, what about those benefits? Google has benefits. Why don't you give us these? So eventually they gave us benefits. And I used the benefits and had a baby. So I just had my baby in January. So I'm real excited about that.
If you don't mind, you can mention how much more it was than 20,000.
Oh yeah, so we did advocacy. They ended up giving us $80,000 Yeah, I was like, what? I'm gonna have 2 babies. It was great. You can do this again. So in 2022, I used $40,000 in 2022, and then someone bought the company and immediately cut all our benefits and fired me. So we did lose the benefits, and we don't have it anymore. But I got my baby, so. Yeah, so I think that's all my stuff. So talk to your employers. That's free to talk to them and try to get benefits.
So a lot of what we're talking about today is, referencing issues that will go into more details throughout the weekend. So we will have a session tomorrow about the whole issue of can we use insurance and what types of insurance are needed for the process between, insurance that covers the treatment itself, the IVF, insurance that the surrogate needs and is not always possible to use for that reason, for various reasons, and insurance for newborns, and also how both legislation can change that, as well as advocating within a workplace. So we will have about a whole session, part of a session, talking about how, in some circumstances, and the growing cases, you can possibly get similar outcomes, and how we can help you in getting those outcomes. So this is what we call, in general, fertility equality. We feel that we are, as it turns out, the group of people that have the least, amount of the least parts that you need, the plumbing parts that are needed for procreation, and it's challenging. I mean, it's, of course, nobody feels fortunate if they only need sperm donation or only need egg donation, etc. But we need everything, and we need somebody to help us carry, and then the medical treatment is very expensive, etc., etc. And we feel that, and we can talk about it in more length, but we feel that there are financial barriers out there. There are just outcomes of discrimination that is allowed to happen because a lot of people don't look at us here, this room, and say, look at this group of people that are childless. If they saw a woman in a doctor's office with her supporting husband trying to become pregnant and doesn't manage it, everybody's going to say, look at those poor people. Look at this poor woman. She's childless. But a lot of people are assuming that we don't have the same desires. Now, some of us don't have those desires, and that's fine. We don't need the majority of us to have those desires, even to say that those of us who do have that desire, those of us who feel that our full human potential cannot be fulfilled without being parents, that we have the same right to have a shot at it without people saying that our infertility, our inability to have a child, is not on par with a fertility that is part of a disease or a condition. And this is what we've been doing for the last few years. A few years ago, we partnered with Resolve, the National Infertility Association, which they'll have a representative here tomorrow, and NCLR, the National Center for Lesbian Rights, who does a lot of work in advocating rights of people like ours, and created a new model legislation that redefines infertility to not just be a disease or condition, but also a matter of status. And literally just the inability to procreate without the help of medical assistance with your partner, or if you don't have a partner. And guess what? That's now the law in Illinois, and in Maine, and in DC. And there's a bill that's advancing nicely now, I should say, but there's more chances of it passing here in New York. Some of you have seen our action alert about it. It's going to come up again starting January. And we think we have a shot of passing it because New York passed an IVF mandate, a mandate that says that insurance policies should cover IVF just in 2019. And they made a point to include lesbian couples there. Guess who wasn't included? So that should be corrected and quickly. And New Jersey has a bill that's advancing as well. And Connecticut is also, there's discussions about moving, pushing, I mean, there is a bill, but it hasn't passed yet. And Massachusetts and Vermont and Minnesota and Oregon and Washington. If we can pass all these bills in the next few years, there's going to be real momentum that could change also the way private companies who are not covered by those bills. So if John next time goes to a company, I forgot to mention California. California, the bill is moving well. If John went to what was formerly known as Twitter and said, but the law of the state is that I'm infertile. How could you not do this? I think he would have had a much better chance. So this is part of the advocacy. So we feel that surrogacy should be done ethically, and it can be done ethically. We feel that we have a role in encouraging that by, for instance, making sure that agencies and clinics and other providers who are coming to our conference know that they can only have this access to the community if they abide by these ethical guidelines. And we think that barriers that can be removed. For instance, if you go through surrogacy now, your medical treatment costs are not going to be tax deductible. You won't be able to use health saving accounts for the vast majority of your bills. We think that's discriminatory. We once again partnered with a lot of other organizations a couple of years ago, and there was a bill that was introduced. But federal legislation is not easy. But Congressman Schiff is is one of the two sponsors of a bill like that, and we think that there's other chances of doing. And we won't go into too much details, but a lot of other things we can do with regards to the surrogates insurance, with regards to newborn insurance, etc. So this is part of our advocacy. And the last thing I want to finish with, and I think we just have a few minutes, is the slide you're looking at, is that sometimes in that fight, we're not always feeling that the entire LGBTQ community is with us. And the reason is that because of everything else we were talking before, especially sometimes from people who feel that they are advocating for the rights of the underdog, which they feel is the surrogate, or women that are exploited or are being bombarded with wrong gender messages or whatever, are anti-surrogacy. And there are some sentiments sometimes within the LGBT community that are at least ambivalent about surrogacy. And they say surrogacy is not a gay issue. We don't have to advocate for surrogacy, not even ethical. In fact, they never even engage with us to the discussion whether surrogacy can be done ethically. But I'm paraphrasing what they're saying, that even ethical surrogacy, they don't think that it's their issue. And we say, yeah, they're right. Most surrogacy is still benefiting non-gay people. So yeah, you can say that surrogacy is not just a gay issue. Just like, you could have said that HIV is not just a gay issue, or breast cancer is not just a gay issue. We know that lesbian women are more susceptible to breast cancer, and there's a lot of activism against that. To help with that. We know that gun violence is not a gay issue. That's even a more far-fetched issue, and yet there are people who feel that the LGBTQ community should stand on the right side on all of these issues. But the most important thing is, and I ask you to now pay more attention to international news, is that especially in Europe and other places, oftentimes surrogacy is used against gay people in the gay community. And we were going to show a video, we don't have time, but look it up, it's everywhere. In Italy right now, the prime minister, who just was accepted with big honors at the White House, is the head of a party that a big part of their legislation their propaganda was, there's no such thing as parent one, parent two. It was so catchy that they even made a dance rap around it. And she is now promoting a bill that's almost passed all the way, a bill that would define surrogacy as a universal crime, which means that it's going to be at par with war crimes or child trafficking, such that regardless of whether you do surrogacy, when you come back to Italy, you could go to jail. You will go to jail. Okay? And that you will pay a fine of €1 million. to the extent that some of the guys who are in process there are looking for asylum elsewhere. And this is Italy. I'm not talking about Russia. We don't know what's happening in Russia or Uganda. I'm talking about Italy. Okay? So the reason this is happening there is because they don't want gay people to become parents. So that's why surrogacy is a gay issue. And that's why we feel that in the gay community, people should at the very least engage with us if they have misgivings about surrogacy. And I think we'll be able to talk to them about how we don't want, the end doesn't justify the means. We don't think that we, each one of us, has a right for a child delivered at our doorsteps tomorrow, who cares how. But we feel that if there are discriminations out there in insurance, in taxation, in sometimes even medical practices, and they're only done because people don't think that we're as deserving as other people to become parents, or they might even be suspicious of our motives for becoming parents, then that's a gay issue. So access to legal and financial access, or at least the ability to remove those barriers, we think is a gay issue. Guess what? Also, we cannot hide the fact that we had children through surrogacy. Okay? Well, some people might assume that we're adopted, but the vast majority of people who are heterosexual who have kids through surrogacy never talk about it. You don't see them. They're not as visible as us. Which is why also de facto that falls on our shoulders. So I first want to mention something I should have mentioned before, that we were going to have the Executive Director of Family Equality here with us, and also Representative Collage. Both were victims of the weather condition and couldn't make it, so they send their regrets. But we do have a nice coalition of LGBT family-oriented associations that are standing with us in these issues. But for instance, we can get organizations such as HRC and other non-family organizations that are more general to always consistently put as much attention into helping us pass those bills and pass those reforms. And we want you to be with us when the time comes to send an action alert, to send a letter or to send something else, to remind those associations that this is about discrimination. This is about justice. Reproductive justice is not just about the right not to have a child. Reproductive justice is also about the right not to have discrimination put in place to prevent you from having a child, to making a child more financially difficult for you. And when it's done to prevent us as gay people to become parents, it should be an issue that the entire LGBT community prioritize high up. I'll just finish by saying that oftentimes what we hear when we say that is they say, cisgender white gay men should wait their turn. That's what we hear from the gay community. I mean, first of all, some of us have the right to live even if we're cisgender and white. But B, that's not who we are. We are people here from all types of, backgrounds. And what's common to all of us is we couldn't pick up the phone and ask our personal assistant to make sure we have a child in 9 months. That's what brings us into this room. And that doesn't mean that we should be at the bottom of the totem, that's my feeling, the totem pole, in waiting until one day somebody feels that we're deserving enough to be advocated for. So I hope that's not too much of a downer. So I invite Jenny here. So first of all, thank you, the panel.
Thanks.
Or I'm not, you're finishing?